A quiet murmur that escalated into an uproar shook not only the UK but the farthest corners of the globe as news spread that Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, was leaving the royal family. This decision, like a bolt from the blue, followed a series of sensational revelations by Prince William, whose words unveiled a shocking truth, exposing the Duchess's true, previously hidden intentions. After these astounding admissions echoed through the ancient corridors of Buckingham Palace, the monarchy made a final, irreversible decision. But what could have been so destructive, so unacceptable, as to necessitate permanently stripping the Duchess of Sussex of her high royal status? The true reasons behind Meghan Markle's much-discussed departure, along with a deeply guarded secret seemingly locked away in Prince William's soul, have finally come to light. The upcoming revelations promise to uncover previously inaccessible details, leaving the world holding its breath in anticipation. Just recently, Prince William's private secretary received a deeply concerning message from a key member of the royal household's public relations department. Within a new documentary project, video fragments were discovered which were absolutely not intended for public viewing, but had inexplicably been included in the final cut. A particular mystery was the unusual camera angle of one of these clips. For a mere 11 seconds, the camera showed Prince William emerging from a dark Range Rover. The video was captured by a camera located inside the vehicle itself. It is important to note that no press representatives were observed nearby, as journalists' access was strictly limited. This circumstance left no doubt. The footage could only have been taken by someone inside the car. Initially, Prince William's entourage was inclined to view this as an unfortunate accident, assuming it was someone's careless action. Perhaps someone had simply forgotten to turn off their phone's recording device, or there had been a technical glitch. However, it soon became clear that something far more sinister might be at play, something that would forever change the perception of what was happening within the royal walls. Soon, 2 more video fragments surfaced, only intensifying the alarm. One of them captured a deeply personal family dinner held in an intimate, private setting, where words and emotions were meant only for the closest family members. Another recording was a photograph of Princess Charlotte, taken during her attendance at a school event for parents, an occasion that, by definition, should have remained private. Such lapses were no longer isolated incidents, and a disturbing pattern became evident. An unknown individual was systematically documenting moments of the royal family's deepest private life, penetrating areas where access was strictly forbidden. Prince William's team of assistants immediately began collecting all available video footage, audio files, and photographic materials related to the upcoming documentary. Their work was conducted discreetly, under the strictest confidentiality, to avoid premature panic. They methodically cross-referenced this data with CCTV recordings, detailed staff logs, and official royal reports, trying to find any clue leading to the solution. With each step of their investigation, more evidence emerged that something highly unusual was happening. Incredibly, fragments of events that never appeared on official cameras were recorded, as if someone had deliberately bypassed established surveillance systems. Private conversations, it seemed, were reproduced through voiceovers, their content slightly altered, yet clearly based on information that had never been publicly disclosed, accessible only to a select few. At one point, an audio recording even surfaced, apparently obtained from a confidential meeting between William, Charles, and the now-deceased Queen, held at Sandringham, a place where crucial state and family matters were decided. It was evident that the planning and execution of these recordings demonstrated exceptional care and foresight, indicating the perpetrator's professionalism and deliberate intent. William himself spent several evenings painstakingly reviewing the raw video footage alone. He proceeded without haste, as if trying to catch every detail, often pausing, meticulously noting his observations, and repeatedly re-watching individual scenes, striving to find the key to the mystery. One of his assistants later recalled how William remained completely still for over 20 minutes, intently gazing at a single frame after finishing the last film. This frame showed his children, strolling carefree through the vast castle grounds, unaware they were being filmed. The camera, likely drone-operated, was positioned high above them and slowly receded, as if aiming to capture a final farewell shot for the film. leaving behind only a sense of ominous mystery and anticipation of what would be revealed next. In that unsettling moment, William realized he was witnessing not merely a legal transgression, but a brazen invasion of privacy. His wife and children appeared on the glowing screen, and the intimate aspects of their home life were ruthlessly exposed to public view, becoming the property of millions of viewers worldwide. Their genuine, unfiltered moments had been stolen and cleverly distorted to create a narrative over which they had absolutely no control. Prince William recognized the urgent need for immediate, yet completely discreet, action. He immediately summoned two of his most trusted assistants and gave them comprehensive and strict instructions. Examine every document, track every request Meghan made while living at the palace, and see how this became possible. Concurrently, extensive interviews were conducted with staff members who had worked closely with Meghan. And gradually, as answers were gathered, an increasingly clear and disturbing picture of events emerged. After official royal engagements, Duchess Meghan often initiated what she called reflection sessions. She would invite assistants to join her in a car or one of the palace rooms to analyze the success of the recent event. At the time, this was perceived as a completely harmless and even beneficial practice. However, over time, staff began to feel a growing premonition that the true purpose of these conversations was far from their own professional development. A specific incident that solidified these unsettling premonitions occurred just hours before a significant royal celebration. When Meghan was discussing the shade of her attire with a palace stylist, they extensively discussed the semantics of the blue hue, its deep connections to royal power, and how, in certain contexts, it could symbolize superiority or dominance over women. Quite suddenly, the third episode of the Netflix documentary series presented the public with a literal recording of that very dialogue. William maintained an outward composure, but his internal indignation grew with unyielding force and persistence. It now dawned on him that Meghan had been systematically and consistently preparing for her final break from the royal family. She had been accumulating intimate moments, meticulously constructing her own version of royal history that perfectly aligned with her plans, transforming genuine lives into a prefabricated narrative. And this was happening despite the palace having taken every conceivable measure to provide her with full support and ensure her safety. For William, this scenario was not entirely new. Princess Diana, his late mother, had endured an identical pattern of private life being publicly exposed. Now, to his deepest sorrow, it was happening again, and this time members of his own family were at the epicenter of events. Duchess Meghan showed firm resolve, rejecting the offer to use restricted royal materials or to submit her own work for subsequent processing and creation by Netflix. Despite the contract's broad interpretations, she managed to seamlessly incorporate deeply intimate and moving memories collected during her active service as a member of the royal family into her project. This unique opportunity allowed her unrestricted access to any information stored in her mind or captured in personal archives, including snippets of private moments, profound reflections, and extensive photo and video materials. Notably, no entity had the right to censor the content presented, and Buckingham Palace was deprived of any means to impose prohibitions. In other words, there were no taboos for her. She possessed complete and unlimited control over the entire process. This entire elaborate construct rested on a single foundational document. However, the situation sharply escalated when an anonymous Netflix insider emerged, sharing valuable information with investigators. According to this insider's testimony, Meghan insistently demanded that the project clearly feature episodes where the royal family displayed detachment and complete indifference to her experiences. The source claimed her goal was to vividly illustrate how women in similar positions to hers were systematically oppressed and suppressed by established monarchical traditions. She sought to convey to the broader public the idea that royal women were expected to remain silent and constantly in a state of strained subservience. From her perspective, this was not merely another media product or spectacle, but a unique opportunity to present her own unfiltered version of events. Nevertheless, Prince William fully understood the extent of potential damage that could be inflicted upon the monarchy's reputation. The situation for the royal family had truly reached a critical point. Prince William observed the unfolding events with unwavering attention. Initially, he aimed to maintain an outward calm while subtly accumulating the necessary information. However, he soon concluded that the time for decisive action had come. After receiving the exhaustive results of the investigation, he handed the monarch, King Charles, a complete summary of the findings. Charles showed no desire to act immediately, as he was already exhausted by years of scandal and incessant public criticism. He reviewed audio recordings whose content was by no means intended for the family circle, examined confidential documents, analyzed security issues, and even saw notes from private chats. Charles realized that the extent of the damage was too vast. After all aspects had been thoroughly considered, William informed him that the interests of the crown now superseded family ties. A radical transformation followed. Despite their traditionally differing approaches, both were united and resolute in understanding the inevitability of the impending actions. Meghan would inevitably face the consequences of her actions. This time, there would be no room for cautious remarks or carefully phrased statements. Her actions had crossed all permissible boundaries. In exchange for a global audience and financial gain, she had exposed personal experiences, intimate family histories, and cherished moments. They agreed on a specific date. A confidential meeting was scheduled at Clarence's house. Prince Harry was not immediately notified. They aimed to prevent any possibility of his intervention, whether to postpone the meeting or warn Meghan. Meghan was invited under the pretext of discussing upcoming royal plans. She remained completely unaware of the true nature of the impending event. She arrived at what she believed to be a routine meeting, and there she would come face to face with the unavoidable consequences of her decisions. The investigation had reached its logical conclusion, and now they had to confront the undeniable truth. The royal family no longer intended to remain in the shadows. Until this moment, Prince William had habitually dealt only with official information. These included staff reports, internal security notes, and analytical summaries of Meghan's press appearances. However, the usual flow of documents was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a completely unforeseen element on his desk. The source of this critically important evidence was not the royal palace, but some external entity. The last missing piece of this complex puzzle arrived from a completely unexpected source, one with no direct affiliation to the monarchy. At that very moment, all the disparate details coalesced into a single terrifying picture. Previous feelings of suspicion, deep fear, and agonizing pain transformed into something incomparably more monumental and disturbing. This revelation came as a complete surprise, vividly demonstrating the eternal truth. Sooner or later, the truth always emerges, breaking through veils of secrecy. In Geneva, under the cloak of deepest confidentiality, a private dinner took place, attended by a high-ranking Netflix executive. This official, who had previously remained in the shadows, suddenly found himself in the spotlight, especially with the impending release of a highly controversial documentary. Among the carefully selected guests were influential European diplomats, renowned writers whose reputations were built on unspoken influence, and several experienced media insiders whose reliability in maintaining secrecy was beyond doubt. Under the diffused light of elegant crystal chandeliers, an atmosphere of restraint prevailed. Only hushed voices, the faint clinking of glasses, and calm, measured conversations broke the silence. There was no room for paparazzi, intrusive journalists, or even mobile phones. Only a small circle of initiates was present. After several glasses of exquisite burgundy, the executive, emboldened by the wine, began to speak far more candidly than the protocol required. He proudly revealed that Netflix had managed to gain access to exclusive royal content that had never before been presented to the wider public. When questioned about Meghan and Harry's involvement in the series, he answered evasively, avoiding direct details, but uttered a phrase that immediately sparked intense discussion. His words clearly hinted that the couple had not merely voiced their version of events. It turned out that long before official filming began, Meghan Markle had already been actively recording and meticulously archiving these materials. An inconspicuous British media consultant took his seat opposite the high-ranking executive at the massive table. With a subtle movement, he activated a tiny recording device, cleverly concealed beneath his coat, ensuring its complete stealth. He deliberately allowed the CEO to continue expressing his thoughts without interruption, letting the words flow naturally from his mouth. Upon the meeting's conclusion, the consultant stepped out into the embrace of the cold night after dinner. There, under the cover of darkness, he made a secure call, his breath rising into the air in white, ephemeral wisps. Just 10 minutes later, an alert flashed at Clarence House. Less than an hour later, Prince William received an exhaustive and detailed briefing. The next morning, a sealed diplomatic pouch appeared on a table in London, marking an event of exceptional importance. Inside the envelope was the complete recording of the previous night's conversation. Prince William was not the only listener. Beside him, in an atmosphere of tense anticipation, sat his august father, King Charles. The head of royal communications and 2 experienced legal advisors joined them in this small but significant room. The CEO's voice repeatedly uttered the same phrase: "The audio is not for public consumption." And with each repetition, the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. However, despite the irrefutable nature of the recorded material, there were strict legal limitations on what could be done, even with such audio. It was not enough to initiate a full-fledged case. They needed something more tangible, something with a clear, undeniable purpose. And then, with almost dramatic suddenness, that something appeared. The battle lines, it seemed, were drawn with surgical precision. Just 3 days after the significant Geneva dinner, a mysterious envelope, marked with the distinctive symbol of an airplane, materialized within one of the respectable offices of the Royal Legal Consultants. The sender, as expected, chose to remain anonymous, not revealing their identity. Inside lay a copy of a licensing agreement, a document that, despite partially redacted sections, appeared remarkably authentic. Most of its text remained legible, revealing that it was, in all likelihood, an agreement between Archwell Productions and a third-party editor. What was particularly noteworthy was that the document was dated 6 months before Meghan and Harry officially stepped down from their royal duties, which gave its appearance special significance. At the bottom of the document, as if highlighting a particularly important clause, a specific area was marked in red ink. The content of this provision proved highly revealing. It granted the producer the right to use digital recordings made during 2019 and 2020, covering official events, visits to royal residences, and even moments captured inside vehicles. This discovery utterly dismissed any notion of spontaneity. On the contrary, everything pointed to careful and premeditated planning, which was now coming to light. A small piece of paper, inserted into the contract, though signed but without the sender's name, lent a truly intriguing and mysterious undertone to the entire story. The message contained on it was concise, yet deeply piercing. They knew what they were doing. This was followed by an unequivocal confirmation. It was planned in advance. And finally, a very insistent plea, addressed to an unseen recipient. "Please keep this." Prince William meticulously studied this fragment, returning to it again and again, as if trying to find a hidden meaning in every word. The paper crumpled and deformed under his convulsively clenching fingers, reflecting his inner tension. For long months, he had stubbornly held onto the belief that what was happening was nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding. Perhaps Meghan had made a mistake, or Harry might not have fully grasped the complexity of the situation. He desperately clung to the idea that their judgment had been clouded by unbearable stress and profound grief they had experienced. Now, however, the ruthless truth stood before him in all its ugliness. Even before their final departure from the royal family, Meghan had meticulously documented her personal interpretation of royal life, fully aware that these materials could ultimately be sold or disseminated to the public. For Prince William, this was not merely a betrayal of trust. It was a treacherous and flagrant violation of all unspoken, yet unshakable rules. The palace could no longer maintain inaction and a policy of silence. Immediate and decisive measures were required. The royal legal staff immediately commenced their duties, demonstrating a high degree of professionalism. Over the past year, while Meghan and Harry were still active members of the royal family, they had been instructed to meticulously monitor every public event the couple attended. This went far beyond regular protocol tracking. Their primary objective was to minimize potential damage to the monarchy's reputation. High-ranking representatives contacted major broadcasters, including Sky News, ITV, and the BBC, urging them to refrain from discussing private family moments or showing any video materials circulated without official authorization. Lawyers also promptly prepared and sent official legal letters, containing stern warnings, to international media outlets, cautioning them against publishing any Netflix materials that had not yet received official distribution. Netflix itself received an unambiguous notification stating, "The monarchy will take decisive action, including resorting to international courts if necessary, should the platform proceed with broadcasting sensitive personal moments involving members of the royal family." However, legal battles and endless bureaucracy were merely one aspect of the meticulously crafted strategy. Standard press releases and meticulously phrased public statements did not truly resonate with Prince William. His genuine desire was to establish direct personal contact with Meghan, meeting her face to face. He sought not another media spat or exchange of barbs through the press, but a deeply personal, frank conversation, free from prying eyes. However, before taking any decisive steps, it was crucial for him to have a conversation with another key individual. This woman, once part of the original creative team at Archwell Productions, possessed unique experience working closely with Meghan and Harry, having spent countless hours reviewing raw video footage for their impactful documentary series. Nevertheless, in late 2021, she unexpectedly left the project and had since completely disappeared from the public eye. However, when palace representatives contacted her in early 2025, she agreed to a private meeting with Prince William's senior communications director. Her indispensable condition was absolute confidentiality, and for the meeting, she used an assumed name. During this fateful meeting, held under the strictest secrecy, Alicia confirmed the darkest premonitions that had long plagued the royal family. It turned out that Meghan had systematically collected extensive personal materials, not just isolated fragments, but entire hours of recordings, voice messages, informal conversations, and even exclusive footage filmed directly within the palace. This went far beyond accidental voice messages or long-forgotten audio recordings. Meghan meticulously documented moments that most ordinary people would consider too personal or insignificant to save, demonstrating astonishing thoroughness. As Alicia claimed, Meghan sought to fully control the public narrative of her life and events, shaping it according to her own discretion. Her primary concern was that public opinion might turn against her due to targeted press manipulation and unfavorable coverage of certain events. However, Meghan's true aspirations extended significantly beyond merely controlling her own image. Her plan was far more extensive and ambitious, touching upon fundamental foundations. Meghan sought to question the very foundation of the monarchy, Alicia frankly stated. She genuinely believed that her personal experience could vividly demonstrate to the entire world the archaic nature and profound flaws of the existing system, portraying it in an unfavorable light. Meghan's personal recordings, meticulously dated and adorned with precise timestamps, contained countless pages. After a highly tumultuous and emotionally charged family meeting, one of these notes vividly depicted Prince William taking a solitary stroll through the expansive Kensington Gardens. Meghan's apparent objective was to craft a specific image, emphasizing his supposed isolation and detachment from his surroundings. It was then that Prince William clearly realized his persona was being exploited for unsavory purposes, an act that far exceeded the usual presentation of Harry and Meghan's own positions. In response, William made an unwavering and uncompromising decision. Meghan would be comprehensively isolated from all aspects of royal life. This meant the irreversible cessation of any joint public engagements, the annulment of all previously extended royal invitations, and a strict prohibition on any public appearances in their company. For her, this would mark a final departure from her accustomed way of life. The upcoming Thursday was set as the day of an inevitable and decisive confrontation. Meghan had received a notification about an upcoming discussion regarding a potential project aimed at raising public awareness about mental health issues. Maintaining a formal, polite distance was no longer feasible. The time had come to move from empty words to decisive and concrete action. Their patience had completely run out, They were no longer willing to wait or simply observe what was happening. Meghan arrived in a severe, deep, almost charcoal gray coat. Her face remained utterly unreadable, devoid of the slightest hint of emotion, and her hair was impeccably styled in a neat, low bun. She carried no luggage or documents, only a modest mobile phone. Her accompanying individual, as if following an unspoken directive, remained far behind. None of those present offered her even a fleeting smile, nor was a single kind word spoken in her direction. Instead, she was met by a very formal doorman who unceremoniously led her down a barely noticeable side corridor. On one wall, like a silent guardian, hung a large portrait of the Queen, gazing intently at the scene. The tension in the air was almost palpable, yet the meeting room itself was considerably smaller than she might have imagined. Despite the impressive ceiling height, the natural daylight was almost entirely absorbed by massive, heavy drapes, plunging the room into a deep twilight. In the center of the room sat an elegant dark walnut table, with only 2 chairs facing each other. Inside, King Charles, Prince William, and 2 high-ranking royal officials were already waiting. She crossed the threshold, but no one present rose to greet her. Upon entering, she paused for a moment, meticulously surveying her surroundings. The atmosphere was permeated by a piercing cold, not physical, but deeply emotional. This proved to be a far harsher ordeal than she could have anticipated. Any display of friendliness was out of the question. Showing no reaction to such an overtly unfriendly reception, she calmly walked to the chair directly opposite William and slowly sat down. Their gazes met for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, and in that instant, it became absolutely clear. All the former goodwill that had once connected them had now irrevocably vanished. King Charles was the first to break the oppressive silence. His voice was even and utterly dispassionate, completely devoid of any emotional nuances. In response, Meghan merely gave a subtle nod. However, before she could even broach the topic of her mental health initiative, Prince William abruptly and unequivocally interrupted her. "This meeting has nothing to do with that," he made clear, and from his tone, it was absolutely evident that the situation was extremely serious. He addressed her with utmost candor. Both of them knew absolutely everything down to the smallest detail. Video recordings, secret audio recordings, and previously concluded agreements. Nothing from this extensive body of information remained hidden. "They have thoroughly discussed absolutely everything," Charles continued, ranging from personal letters and agreements reached to legal contracts and video materials. Meghan's expression remained perfectly composed, as if she were exerting immense effort to maintain absolute self-control, and she only gave a slight tilt of her head. According to William, she hadn't merely shared her own story. She had deliberately publicized highly personal and confidential moments from the lives of other family members. "She has irrevocably crossed every conceivable boundary," he remarked sternly and unequivocally. In response, Meghan adamantly asserted that she had merely spoken the truth. "I was just telling my own story," she stated. William, maintaining his outward composure yet speaking with utmost clarity and unambiguousness, continued, "She didn't just reveal confidential information. She cynically exploited the family for her own selfish ends. Without the slightest hint of trust, she secretly recorded their private conversations. Gaining access to their private lives, she shamelessly turned it exclusively to her own benefit." Prince William articulated his judgments with extreme candor, pointing out that she had handled materials not originally intended for public disclosure, filmed in private areas of the residence, and documented personal dialogues, despite her public statements about seeking privacy. In their dialogue, every word carried immense significance. Meghan displayed unwavering resolve, firmly defending her inherent right to free expression and full authorship over her own narrative. In her deep conviction, what had been presented to the public was not fiction but undeniable reality. In response, King Charles presented a counter-argument, emphasizing that the royal family also possessed an undeniable right to protect its good name. "It's not just about having a voice," he explained with a noticeable degree of seriousness in his tone. "This concerns the exploitation of one's privileged position and access to confidential information for personal gain." At that moment, William firmly slid a document across the smooth table surface, then picked up a folder lying nearby. It was a newly discovered licensing agreement. He asserted that this document was irrefutable proof that Meghan had signed it long before her formal stepping down from royal duties. According to him, she had already been diligently organizing her materials then. William insisted that her actions were not merely a reflection on past events but a premeditated and methodical collection of data. In response, Meghan smoothly removed her hands from the document and leaned back in her seat. Clinging tightly to the armrests, she maintained a mask of absolute composure, carefully concealing any signs of inner turmoil. It became evident that what was happening was no longer an ordinary conversation. It was now perceived as an open and unambiguous accusation. Meghan subtly glanced at Charles, as if trying to awaken his memory of countless newspaper headlines and the profound sense of alienation she had experienced in the palace. However, Charles unequivocally declared that media attention was no longer a key aspect of their discussion. The root of the problem, he stated, lay in a fundamental breach of trust. He emphasized that Meghan had independently shaped her public image within their society. In response, she explained that she needed to be prepared for any possible outcome. She claimed she was deeply afraid of what the palace might do after their departure. William unequivocally refuted this, insisting that her actions far exceeded the scope of ordinary precaution and that she was documenting events to which she had no ownership rights. "It was a betrayal," he uttered. His voice held a slight tremor, and in that tremor, there was perhaps less anger than a deep sense of sadness and exhaustion. Meghan, in turn, asserted that she was merely defending herself. William did not accept this argument. "She profited from their suffering," he sharply stated. Following this tense confrontation, an oppressive silence settled in the room. The atmosphere was filled only with dry formulations and clearly defined legal definitions, completely excluding any emotional expression or rise in tone. King Charles, known for his brevity, spoke his words with concise precision, yet with barely suppressed triumph, which imbued them with exceptional significance. "The royal family has irrevocably lost faith in Meghan, and for this reason, she is no longer seen as an integral part of their future. And the public has also ceased to favor her. From now on, she will not participate in royal philanthropic initiatives, and the status of her title will be subject to thorough review." Following this declaration, an official document from the royal office was handed to her. This document unequivocally stated that any subsequent use of materials related to the royal family in her future professional endeavors would be immediately pursued by law. Then, daring to break the prevailing silence, she allowed herself to clarify the true meaning of all these pronouncements. Had someone dared to interrupt her speech? In response to her question, Prince William, with icy inflexibility and unequivocalness, declared that she was henceforth completely excluded from participation in any royal communications, projects, or official events. She was also strictly forbidden from using the title of a working royal in public. And, furthermore, the palace would officially cease to represent her interests. Initially, she was in a state of deep stupor. Her gaze was fixed nowhere, as if chained to an invisible point. However, as the spoken words gradually permeated her consciousness, each one settled in her soul like an unbearable weight. This event went far beyond the simple loss of a certain function or honorary title. It marked a final rupture, an irreversible boundary beyond which there was no turning back. Though she had once willingly stepped away from royal life, she was now definitively and irrevocably stripped of that option. Was Harry aware of this? Her trembling voice barely whispered. "Yes, without a doubt," Charles replied. He received full information about what was happening, but chose not to attend this meeting. It was at this critical moment that a distinct expression of uncertainty first appeared on Meghan's face. Exuding determination with every movement, Meghan rose and, with unwavering confidence, declared that those assembled were mistaken, that the wider public fully trusted her, and that her exclusion would only serve as irrefutable proof of her righteousness. In response, William, without hesitation, also stood. He forcefully accused her of meticulously planning every step, videotaping events, skillfully manipulating their lives like an experienced director working from a pre-written script and anticipating a grand triumph. Meghan cast a final, deeply meaningful glance at Charles. However, he remained silent, not uttering a single word. Before finally leaving the room, Meghan uttered a last, very significant warning. "Now the whole world has seen the truth," her voice resonated. William immediately turned to his father, adamantly asserting that the only true value was truth, and only it possessed undeniable power. This was an undoubted, irreversible end. No retreat, no return to the previous state of affairs was anticipated. One of the staff present handed her a tightly sealed envelope containing an official message with all the necessary clarifications. Meghan accepted it, decisively turned, and left the room. No one dared to follow her. Not the slightest movement was made towards her. Before the massive door closed behind her, the distinct click of her heels echoed across the smooth marble floor. In the spacious room, an absolute, almost palpable silence settled. William slowly sank back into his seat. His face showed neither elation nor triumph, only a calm, deep awareness of the final completion that had occurred. After a prolonged pause, Charles finally broke the silence. "It's all over," he said. William nodded affirmatively, confirming the statement. None of those present could foresee how long this new, altered state of affairs would last. However, something fundamental, impervious to emotions or sentimentality, had irreversibly transformed through this final and unambiguous act. Under the bright spotlights, Meghan displayed remarkable composure. She confidently moved in a new direction, actively engaging with the press, bestowing smiles upon countless camera lenses. However, behind her carefully constructed public facade, significantly larger and more far-sighted plans were brewing. These strategic plans had begun to take clear shape long before she officially announced her departure from royal duties. The landmark agreement with Netflix was merely one of many fragments in the extensive mosaic of her grand project. Meghan meticulously constructed her own narrative and forged a unique public image, designed to forever alter established perceptions of the monarchical institution. Despite this chapter in her life had reached its logical conclusion, and the final word came directly from the palace walls. The royal family had delivered its unequivocal decision. Meghan herself, in turn, was deeply convinced that she had been the target of a meticulously planned conspiracy. However, the crown had always adhered to its own, distinct approach to concluding matters and making momentous decisions. A significant portion of the royal family traditionally relied on strict, highly qualified, and protocol-abiding palace public relations teams, whose work was steeped in centuries of tradition and custom. Meghan, by contrast, chose an entirely different, innovative strategy. Deviating sharply from accepted norms, she assembled a highly unusual cohort of professionals. Seasoned media strategists, leading Hollywood public relations experts, dedicated personal staff, and even a talented director who had prior experience with projects related to royal themes. Such a composition of consultants was highly atypical for the conservative royal court. This cohesive team tirelessly worked to forge her new, meticulously crafted public image. Their operations consistently remained behind the scenes, in the shadows. They never contacted official palace staff nor attended any official royal events, maintaining complete independence and confidentiality. Their daily duties encompassed a wide range of tasks, from assisting in drafting compelling press releases and thoroughly analyzing video footage to actively participating in strategically important conference calls where momentous decisions were often made. Gradually, concern began to mount among palace staff. The reason was a series of unusual incidents that clearly deviated from the accustomed and strictly regulated routine. Suddenly, emails began to be sent not through the established palace protocol system but from personal accounts. Photographers were repeatedly spotted in entirely inappropriate locations, causing bewilderment. Moreover, staff were required to sign non-disclosure agreements that went far beyond common palace etiquette. Many at the time were entirely unaware that Duchess Meghan was already actively laying the groundwork for the Archewell project, which would later transform into a significant media brand and a full-fledged series for the Netflix streaming platform. Initially, This endeavor was merely a collection of ideas born during private conversations and informal meetings. She skillfully leveraged her extensive personal connections and enlisted the support of a renowned Beverly Hills lawyer to establish contacts with the Hollywood elite. It was through this attorney's efforts that she managed to re-engage with a Netflix executive she had met years prior during a film project. This rekindled connection paved the way for one of the most substantial financial agreements in media deal history. The process of bringing the concept to life took time. Meghan's team tirelessly worked to present her as a modern woman unfairly marginalized by an archaic system within the American media landscape. Narratives actively disseminated to the press portrayed her as brave, underestimated, and unyielding in defending her position. Capturing widespread public attention proved as crucial a priority as garnering universal support. When Netflix representatives finally contacted her, collaborating with Meghan proved to be significantly challenging. She adamantly defended her right to final say over the narrative, demanded complete control over what would be presented to viewers, and insisted on creative director authority. The Duchess sought to be not merely the subject of the narrative but its full author and creator. Most palace residents apparently underestimated the true depth of the situation. Meghan, meanwhile, diligently maintained an appearance of well-being, appearing at official events with a welcoming smile and dutifully performing her royal duties. However, her nights were filled with secret negotiations with digital technology specialists, experienced editors, and visionary producers. In essence, she simultaneously existed in two entirely different realities. 2 months before the official announcement of her and Harry's departure from royal duties, she took one of her boldest and most decisive steps. Meghan discreetly traveled to New York. There, she held a confidential meeting with representatives of a media agency, entering a boutique hotel through a side entrance and skillfully avoiding the attention of her usual security detail. For many years, this meeting remained hidden from public view until its existence was revealed during a different legal process. During this meeting, Meghan presented a fleeting but highly significant glimpse into her proposed creative endeavor. It included a poignant and candid monologue about her multifaceted activities as a duchess, segments of her leisurely walks through the majestic grounds of Windsor, and meticulously staged shots of her domestic life, reflecting the immense pressure she faced. And while the video appeared somewhat raw and deeply emotional, it was professionally produced and carefully directed to reveal a side of her personality that palace rules and conventions had never allowed her to express. Her bold promise to immerse viewers in the previously closed royal world became the key and most impressive element of her presentation. She expressed readiness to share exclusive materials she possessed. It was this, ultimately, that swayed streaming giant Netflix to accept the proposed concept. The appeal lay not only in the potential drama and celebrity aura but also in the anticipation of something genuinely authentic and utterly unprecedented. Duchess Meghan, demonstrating her foresight and strategic thinking, meticulously prepared for the inevitable barrage of criticism she anticipated would erupt immediately after the documentary series premiered. To this end, she actively collaborated with leading PR firms well in advance of the project's release. Her calculation proved entirely accurate. Both public and a very tangible reaction from the palace were expected. She was poised for an immediate and decisive response, ready to defend her position. According to a respected public relations expert, her tactic was unwavering resilience. The main goal, she believed, was to ensure her voice was heard, leaving public support or disapproval to their own discretion. Prince Harry, for his part, participated in this endeavor, sharing his deep experiences and giving interviews. However, insiders claim he was not involved in the initial strategic planning. Moreover, he once even expressed a wish to remove a certain segment concerning his brother William, deeming it too personal and intimate. Nevertheless, by that point, all details had already been finalized and approved by Meghan herself. Concurrently, Meghan actively expanded her extensive network of contacts through the Archwell Foundation. She purposefully established connections with influential journalists, prominent activists, political figures, and celebrities. Attending significant events was not only a way for her to maintain her own prominence, but also an opportunity to create necessary photographs. She was well aware that such actions would not be approved by the palace. This is why she maintained secret communication with a royal aide who regularly supplied her with confidential information. How far would the palace go? What legal steps might be taken? And who was making what statements? When the situation reached its climax, Meghan's legal team was fully prepared. They meticulously crafted arguments based on the principles of creative freedom and personal rights. The Duchess believed she was completely secure. The only person she hadn't accounted for was William, though he wasn't going to remain silent indefinitely either. William was quietly preparing for a definitive departure from the existing situation, while Meghan systematically amplified her global influence. He had no desire to give speeches or seek public revenge. Rather, he believed the game was over, and further participation was pointless. He absolutely did not want to be drawn into tangled backroom negotiations or open confrontations anymore. His sole desire was a complete separation and the chance to start anew, forging a new, independent existence. Meghan, however, made one last desperate move before their entire shared structure completely collapsed. Days before the fateful and tense meeting at Clarence House, she initiated an attempt to contact William, using mutual acquaintances as intermediaries. Her message was crystal clear and unambiguous. She even offered to delay the launch of a second media project, demonstrating a willingness to compromise, in order to have a private meeting and confidentially resolve the accumulated disagreements. Her sole request was to receive impartial feedback from the family regarding the upcoming Netflix series. However, William remained silent. This offer went unanswered. Instead of responding, he clung to the faint hope of a dialogue, waiting for her arrival at Clarence House, believing that a way out of the impasse might be found there. Nevertheless, contrary to all expectations, the atmosphere at that meeting was far from peaceful and conciliatory. For years, Meghan meticulously crafted her public image, skillfully shaping public opinion through media. She masterfully manipulated narratives and adjusted the public perception of the monarchy. However, she fatally underestimated a core value foundational to this family: unwavering loyalty. Treachery, incidentally, was not a phenomenon alien to the royal family. Given his inherent duties and, crucially, the tragic death of his mother, William vehemently opposed his loved ones' lives becoming subjects of public spectacle or promotional campaigns. While Meghan continued her behind-the-scenes maneuvers, actively leveraging her connections, the palace maintained a stony silence, showing neither resistance nor response. Yet, in royal circles, such silence often signals a final and irreversible decision. This was not a pause, but merely the prelude to a profound schism. Amidst the rapidly escalating confrontation, Queen Elizabeth II's presence was subtle but palpable. She was perceived as a global leader, an unshakable constant who remained unchanged through decades of tumultuous shifts. Under her wise leadership, numerous scandals, political upheavals, international conflicts, and national defeats unfolded. Her Majesty was the unyielding core that defined British identity. In recent years, however, she had observed with deep sorrow as her own family seemed to be tearing itself apart. Away from the glare of spotlights and rigid protocol, many mistakenly believed the Queen remained oblivious to the unfolding events. However, those close to her knew well. Her memory retained every detail, and her intuition was exceptionally sharp. She deeply understood the nature of human relationships, the intricacies of power, and its accompanying dangers. Few suspected that just weeks before her passing, the Queen composed a personal message. It was addressed exclusively to Prince Charles and Prince William. The contents of this letter only became widely known much later, when Meghan arrived at Clarence House and faced an accusation Her Majesty had foreseen long ago. By the summer of 2022, Her Majesty, the Queen, had significantly reduced her public duties, which she had performed over the preceding months. Her public appearances became much rarer, and she placed increasing responsibility on the shoulders of Prince Charles and Prince William. Despite these changes, only one problem truly occupied her thoughts: the growing estrangement observed within the Sussex family. In private conversations with her most trusted advisors, she posed questions, but publicly the topic was rarely discussed. What compelled Meghan to so readily publicize details of her time at the palace? Why were intimate personal moments appearing on the pages of international media? Why did it seem as though the entertainment and joys inherent to royal life were deliberately being excised from its fabric? The Queen harbored no resentment. Her bewilderment extended beyond just the younger generation. She harbored deep concerns about the future of the crown. Her fears centered on the monarchy's image being deconstructed and put on public display, like a commodity. And this, it seemed, was being done with a clear intent. In August 2022, a particularly noteworthy incident left a deep impression. Prince William received an invitation for tea from the Queen, who was then staying at Balmoral. According to long-standing tradition, this was a routine visit. Yet, something felt amiss. Something felt wrong. A staff member later recalled that the Queen looked tired, but was unusually focused. She gazed intently at William, then poured tea and spoke slowly, deliberately. There was something unsettling, foreboding, in her words. Meghan's silence wasn't the only problem. The whole question was why it was done. This event troubled William, as he later confided to a close friend. It was then that he realized his grandmother wasn't merely concerned. She was warning him of something far more serious. Immediately following that discussion, royal archivists were tasked with meticulously examining the entire body of personal documents related to Meghan and Harry's departure. This imperative came directly from the Queen herself, who insisted on the strictest confidentiality throughout the process. Her Majesty initiated a comprehensive reevaluation of the previously agreed-upon settlement. As specialists delved into numerous notes, emails, and correspondence, minor but troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. At the historic Sandringham Summit, where the terms of the Sussexes' exit were carefully deliberated and documented, a foundation of mutual trust was established. Both parties then undertook clear commitments to refrain from any financial gain by exploiting covert or implicit royal resources. However, when trailers showcasing private, sometimes even intimate, corners of royal residences began to leak into the public sphere, serious concerns arose, calling into question the adherence to these agreements. Even with her own health noticeably deteriorating, the Queen did not hesitate to take decisive action. She emphatically demanded that every single document be presented to her for personal, detailed review. Her Majesty meticulously and thoughtfully examined every line. Upon completing this arduous process, she uttered but one phrase that caught everyone present off guard: Meghan's audacity. Weeks after the aforementioned events, the Queen summoned her private secretary. Under her direct dictation, a letter was meticulously drafted. It was specifically stipulated that this document be written exclusively by hand and sealed with a traditional wax seal. A strict directive was given. The envelope was to be opened only in a situation of extreme, absolute necessity. The content of this message extended far beyond an ordinary communication intended for daily affairs. In essence, it represented her last fundamental instruction. Thus, even as her physical capacity for directly protecting her family came to an end, she found a way to continue safeguarding them, leaving behind a testament that could be activated at the most critical moment. After the monarch's passing, the Queen's personal letter remained securely protected in a safe within Clarence House. Only Prince Charles and Prince William had access to it, and the letter was kept in the strictest secrecy from the general public. During that period, absolutely nothing was disclosed about its contents, and it remained hidden from prying eyes. However, soon after, noticeable changes in palace life began to emerge. The attitude of the monarch's family members towards Meghan began to undergo radical shifts. Although many did not attach much importance to it, those who listened closely to the pulse of palace life could not help but feel the growing transformation that gradually enveloped the royal court. The letter itself was a concise but deeply personal message, handwritten and intended exclusively for the eyes of Prince Charles and Prince William. It lacked the formal directives and specific royal jargon customary in palace correspondence. Instead, it bore the character of a confidential conversation, like a sincere dialogue between close individuals, put into writing. In this address, Her Majesty emphasized their fundamental duties as vigilant guardians of centuries-old traditions and the true meaning of the crown, as well as future sovereigns destined to lead the nation. Should anyone close to the royal court dare to exploit their privileged proximity for selfish aims or personal gain, she urged them to act thoughtfully and purposefully, guided not by momentary fury or impulsive emotions, but by strategic calculation and wisdom. The core essence of her message was crystal clear and unambiguous. Regardless of whether a person possessed royal blood or was an outsider, it was strictly forbidden to turn the private life of the royal family into an object of public discussion or a means of mass entertainment. Her Majesty outlined her vision of the potential consequences that could arise if it were discovered that any member of the royal family had violated the sacred bonds of family trust for fleeting fame or material profit. She expressed her full and unequivocal support for their determination to take retaliatory action in such a situation, emphasizing that such measures would be not only justified but necessary. Notably, her phrasing was not so much a command as an unequivocal permission, granting them the right to act in the interest of preserving the monarchy's dignity. Initially, Prince William found it somewhat difficult to interpret these lines, genuinely hoping that the worst-case scenario could be avoided and everything could be resolved without undue fuss or public disclosure, avoiding any confrontations. However, after the much-discussed Netflix series was released, and new irrefutable evidence emerged of how strictly personal moments of royal life were transformed into public narratives, Her Majesty's words acquired a completely different, profound meaning for him. It seemed she had foreseen such developments long before they occurred, as if possessing the gift of prophecy. Her Majesty had prudently developed her strategy even in the days when the world prepared to bid her farewell, leaving behind a clear and unambiguous message designed to protect the most sacred and significant aspects of the monarchy from external encroachment. This document fundamentally changed the perception of the situation for both Prince William and King Charles, becoming a guiding star for them. Prince William was not merely acting as a family member by marriage when he subsequently addressed Meghan about the unauthorized disclosure of confidential royal material. He was acting in strict accordance with the will of the late Queen. He clearly recalled her words and now fully understood their true meaning and profound significance, realizing that his actions were dictated not by personal animosity, but by duty to the crown and family. The key aspect of the royal family's decision regarding future actions was entirely centered around the content of this message. Questions of public perception and the desire to avoid confrontation receded into the background, losing their former significance. The agenda held a single, fundamental goal: the preservation of the monarchy's centuries-old heritage. The ill-considered step of one individual, who chose to turn genuinely intimate family events into a large-scale public narrative, created an existential threat to the dynasty's long history and reputation. It seemed Her Majesty had foreseen such developments long before they became apparent to others. When Prince William finally revealed the contents of this message to a small circle of his most trusted advisors, the Queen's extraordinary clarity of thought and profound foresight became undeniable. Buckingham Palace realized it could no longer remain in the shadows, adhering to a strategy of inaction. What might previously have seemed a course of self-restraint now, on the contrary, became a clear, unspoken mandate for decisiveness. Her Majesty had clearly stated her will. Moreover, even after her passing, the Queen's farewell message held immeasurably greater power and weight than any statements made in the days that followed. Meghan was likely mistaken in believing that after the Queen's passing, the royal family would become less unyielding and more tolerant of her actions. However, she underestimated the tremendous influence of the formal message and its powerful echo. Meghan did not grasp that her position in the hierarchy was already irrevocably lost. When she dared to cross the invisible, yet clearly delineated boundary set by the Queen's words, she did precisely what Her Majesty had cautioned against. She exploited her exceptional status to publicize strictly personal circumstances. By that point, the true meaning of the message had become absolutely unambiguous. The path for her was closed, and this happened with dignity and adherence to protocol, rather than with open indignation. Nevertheless, within the walls of the royal palace, one troubling, still unresolved question remained. What was Prince Harry's true role in this situation? Not fully realizing the true depth of the unfolding events, he simply found himself an unwitting center of universal attention. Or was he a conscious accomplice in the decision to publicize private family matters? Inside the palace, opinions diverged, and people lost confidence in a definitive judgment. It was exceedingly difficult to draw the line where Harry's personal space ended and the influence of surrounding events began. He steadfastly supported Meghan throughout all her public statements, legal battles, and numerous interviews, yet there were clear manifestations of his deep internal torment. The prince's closest circle wondered if he was in a state of acute internal contradiction, as his decisions did not always appear logical or consistent. Despite his unwavering loyalty to Meghan, this seemingly came at a significant personal cost. In retrospect, it can be acknowledged that Meghan was not the first person to be a source of deep unhappiness in his royal life. The origins of this deeply rooted discomfort lay in his childhood. Numerous analysts and informed sources from royal circles concurred that his personality was inherently shaped by the relentless media onslaught, the premature death of his mother, and the pervasive sense of insecurity he perpetually experienced. They understood the depth of his ingrained distrust of the institution that was, in essence, meant to protect him, but simultaneously valued his patronage and influence. The palace, contrary to its original purpose, became neither a refuge nor a reliable shield for Harry. On the contrary, it paradoxically only contributed to the escalation of his inner torments. Moreover, over time, others could unceremoniously exploit these deeply ingrained beliefs of his for their own purposes. He was no longer simply a prince, merely performing his monarchical duties from time to time. He had transformed into a completely different, unrecognizable person. A significant turning point in Harry's life came after Meghan entered his world. In her, he discovered not just a companion, but a true kindred spirit who fully shared his deep indignation and flatly refused to remain silent when faced with wrongdoing or blatant injustice. Meghan, possessing a discerning mind, was perfectly aware that inaction and silence could be extremely detrimental. She had no fear whatsoever of challenging the established order of things and possessed exceptional foresight regarding the complex dynamics of media interaction. Both of them cherished the unwavering conviction that, by acting together, they could transform a system they considered flagrantly unjust, and that sincerity, combined with genuine love, could overcome any, even the most insurmountable, obstacles. However, from the very beginning of their joint Netflix project, it was perfectly clear who had taken the undisputed leading role. According to those who had the opportunity to work with them, Harry was often present at meetings and discussions, but his attention was not always focused. He showed consistent and keen interest in issues concerning veterans, mental health, and wildlife conservation. Nevertheless, he often remained silent when the group began to delve into the minute details of editing, storyline nuances, or exclusive royal footage. According to a memorandum drafted during a legal assessment at the palace, Harry aimed to remain at a high strategic level of discussions. Meghan, however, assumed a significantly broader and more influential role in the creation process. It was she who made key decisions regarding which episodes would be kept, which fragments would be cut, and also determined the main direction and focus of the entire series. While Harry largely remained a passive observer, only occasionally interjecting brief comments, it was Meghan who took the dominant and leading position. This significant divergence in their approaches began to gain increasing importance as the work progressed. Although Harry's voice, face, and personal memories undoubtedly became an integral part of the series, on an emotional level he experienced clear uncertainty. According to his close circle, he was not fully aware of the true extent of the use of personal footage or the potential harm it could cause. However, even he could not completely ignore some particularly egregious instances. One such was a private conversation with Prince William that took place after their grandfather's funeral. Harry was, evidently, consumed by rage, although the audio track of this episode was cut and replaced with subtitles. This moment, in his deep conviction, was unique, extremely personal, and should have been unequivocally excluded from the final version. Nevertheless, it remained in the series. As the project developed, hostility between him and Meghan steadily increased. One night during a lengthy editing session in California, their disagreements reached a peak. Meghan considered it fundamentally important to keep an episode recounting a difficult Christmas at Sandringham, while Harry emphatically demanded its removal. Ultimately, the scene was still left in. Among those observing the unfolding events, noticeable disagreements began to emerge. Some, filled with sympathy, leaned towards pity, believing that Prince Harry was particularly vulnerable and fragile, broken by the weight of past personal tragedy. Others, especially residents and staff of the royal palace, began to see his actions as a clear threat, persistently asserting that a plea of ignorance could no longer serve as an acceptable justification. After all, Prince Harry, by signing documents, bore full responsibility for his decisions and their consequences. However, it was not only the use of intimate personal footage that caused deep indignation in William. Particular irritation was caused by the specific phrases and formulations Harry used in his public interviews. The one who had once been his loyal brother and faithful ally now, in his words, sounded bitter and resentful. He openly stated that he had been abandoned, deeply hurt, and demonstrably neglected, his feelings and his position disregarded. Regardless of how justified his grievances might have been, palace representatives unanimously considered that the chosen tone and, especially, the timing of the publication made his statement resemble a deliberate public insult to the entire royal family. The deep internal turmoil gripping Prince Harry began to manifest externally. After the first wave of criticism hit him, he immediately contacted one of the most reliable and trusted palace staff members. He had only one agonizing question: had he gone too far? Had he crossed an invisible but extremely important line of what was permissible? A direct answer, however, never came. The staff member merely thanked him dryly and, without another word, ended the call. Thus, not only were contradictions raging within Harry himself, but the relationship between him and his royal family was also permeated by deep, irreconcilable differences. He made truly titanic efforts, striving at all costs to shield Meghan from the unbearable pain and suffering that his own mother had once endured. However, paradoxically, it was precisely these actions that plunged him into a rapid whirlwind of events that mercilessly destroyed almost everything he had once highly valued or cherished. From a legal standpoint, he gave his full and conscious consent to everything that happened. He was well aware that cameras impartially recorded his every word and movement during interviews. However, on a much deeper emotional level, the situation proved significantly more complex and entangled. According to his close friends, he felt more alone than ever before in his life. Despite his newfound wealth, global fame, and constant public attention, none of this brought him the longed-for inner peace and tranquility. Although he found himself trapped within a certain public narrative that he himself had long ceased to believe in, deep down he still sincerely believed that through his actions he was building a better, freer life for himself and his family. Prince Harry had been informed that Meghan had conducted the final confrontation at Clarence's house the previous evening. He decided to refrain from being present. He told one of his closest assistants that he did not wish to be there if the circulating rumors proved true. He distanced himself from all parties involved in the conflict, turned off his mobile phone, and chose to remain in the seclusion of Montecito. The situation was extremely agonizing for him, and his reluctance did not signify indifference. By that point, it had become unbearably difficult to face the truth, as confronting the harsh reality seemed an insurmountable task. Prince Harry now occupies an ambivalent position, being neither entirely guilty nor entirely blameless. He remains in deep doubt as to whether he became the savior or the destroyer of his lineage, and his soul oscillates between attachment and loss. Although he was not definitively estranged from the monarchical dynasty, the degree of their mutual alienation was evident. Even in thought, Prince William still harbors hope for reconciliation. King Charles is in a state of profound internal conflict. Despite Queen Camilla's call for patience and forbearance, shattered trust, as is known, very rarely fully recovers. Harry did not succumb to shouting. He also refrained from direct public accusations. However, his silence gained much greater weight than any spoken words, for he allowed others to voice his position and let events unfold naturally. It was a dark morning at Clarence's house. It was far from silent, permeated with noise and anxiety. It was at this moment that radical changes were brewing. Prince Harry felt every moment of what was happening, despite the significant distance separating him from the epicenter.